Thank you so much, John. You are sacred love, and you're pretty too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There's a song by Karen Drucker. Next time we're going to have you sing it. It's called How Could Anyone Ever Tell You That You're Anything Less Than Beautiful? So next time John's here, we'll have him sing that song. So yes, as John mentioned, Victor is speaking out at Unity Springfield today. Yeah, so I know, big stuff that he's doing. So, but we're blessed. There are very few people I trust other than Victor to be here and take that spot. So grateful for you, John. Yeah, so as Jessica mentioned, we are engaged right now in a depthful series on the 12 powers. And I want to share a little bit about this today. Well, maybe a lot about this today. So the 12 powers is a core unity teaching that is founded on this basic premise that I'll keep repeating every week, partly because this is kind of antithetical to what most of us were taught. It's founded on this idea that we are not born in original sin. We are not sinners, and so we don't come to church in order to be saved from that. We are, in fact, born in original blessing. We are whole, holy, and perfect in origin. So when I tell people that, there's the question, then why come to church, right? And so the answer from a unity perspective is that we don't come to church because we're sinners who need to be saved, but we come and gather in spiritual community because we are dreaming a dream of separation from that truth of our being, the knowing of that innate perfection that lies within us, and we come here, gather here to awaken. And the 12 powers is what unity teaches as the fundamental process or method, not the only one that works, but the one that we apply to help us to awaken from this collective dream of separation. And so the path of the 12 powers goes like this. The idea that Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the unity movement, what he teaches is that when Jesus reached a certain level of his own spiritual development, he then proceeded to call forth his 12 disciples. Metaphysically interpreted, this is the idea of calling forth these 12 innate faculties within ourselves so that that which was used within consciousness from a material sense, a sense consciousness perspective, a worldly sense, can then be used for the spiritual, can then be awakened, and quickened is the term that Charles Fillmore used, into truth. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. So fundamentally, this is the journey that we've been on together, where we're here to collectively touch in on these aspects of consciousness and awaken them and spiritualize them so that we, like Jesus, following the example of Jesus, can then waken to the knowing that the Father and I are one. So we began 5 weeks ago by looking at faith. And here in unity, this perspective on faith may differ from other, even Christian traditions. And we start with the premise that none of us actually need more faith. The question is not about accumulating more faith. The question is about what is your faith placed in? And to the extent that our faith is placed in the worldly, placed in material, placed in our savings account, placed in the finite, our bodies, our capabilities, my intellect, my brain, then we always fall short of the mark. And so the turning of faith over to the spiritual isn't, again, belief like faith in an entity called God, but instead turning faith into the belief, the ability to perceive with our inner eye truth. So it's faith in truth or divine ideas. That is the beginning of this invitation. In what ways do you place faith in your own capabilities as opposed to in this invisible, infinite substance that is God itself, that is forever renewable, that is the truth of wholeness, the truth of abundance for all? And so the turning, the spiritualizing of our faith is the foundation of our spiritual progress or awakening. Second week, we turn to strength. And now strength in the worldly sense, of course, is bodily strength. And again, we talked about the fact that we don't need more strength necessarily. We have access within ourselves to an infinite storehouse of strength. But so many of us use our strength in the form of stubbornness to old ideas of lack and limitation. So strength and unity, the synonym for it is steadfastness. And so we can look at it like, how are we steadfast to old ideas in lack and limitation? And how can we instead turn the use of our strength toward our spiritual faith so that strength then becomes faith over time? Because what is faith? If the first obstacle, the first splat that happens to us, we come down and we stay down. Strength, the importance of that to the endurance of our spiritual journey. And then finally, wisdom was the third week that we addressed. So the exploration of wisdom was to take in the ways in which we are worldly wise. We have lots of common sense. We know the way things are. We have tremendous experience. We have tremendous book knowledge. And on this, we rest. But during that week, the invitation then, last week, was to consider, well, if all I rely on is my past experience, my past knowledge, then where is room for miracles? How does the impossible, what wasn't before, ever made in my life, if that's where I turn to for knowing? And so the invitation instead then is to become still, to go into the silence, because that still small voice of the Holy Spirit, of your higher power, of divine wisdom within you, whatever name you want to call it, that voice doesn't yell, it whispers. And we have to be willing to turn within and not be listening to the cacophony of outer sounds that tell us what is impossible, what is not realistic, what is impractical, what is irrational, and trust something deeper within ourselves, faith, steadfast over time, building into a wisdom that knows how to choose beyond this world what is true for us. And it's with this context that I'm inviting us into a journey today about love. Now, love, as many of the books on the 12 powers say, love is the most universally acknowledged of all of the 12 powers, and at the same time, the most frequently misunderstood of all of the powers, right? I mean, just even in our own lives, probably, there's a lot of confusion that can happen around this concept of love that is so big. But I'm going to invite you, tapping into your own wisdom around this, to first even just begin by considering for you love. Asking yourself, well, what or whom do I love? Those who know me know that I love chocolate. And I repeatedly say this because I found that the more times I mention it in a service, the more often chocolate shows up in my office during the week. So every week we'll talk about chocolate. I also love poetry. Since I was a little girl, I was really lonely in my childhood, and so I turned to books. And I remember inspirational poetry is kind of what got me through my childhood. And I was a lawyer before being here, and so the value of words and the beauty of words has always deeply affected me. I love poetry. I also love trees. I love climbing trees. I love hugging trees. I love poems about trees. I love the way that, especially in autumn, when the sun is setting and you're walking through a forest and the light shines through the leaves, I love that moment. I also love God. And by that, I mean that I love truth. I have been a seeker for what is true and what is real and what is deep since I was a little girl. I also love my husband. And I was realizing that probably not in this exact order are the things that I love. Hi, honey. Who's going to watch this video later? How come I wasn't first? So enough about me, though. What do you love? I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for a second and turn within. And just take a moment and think on something that you readily love. It could be your puppy, your child, your partner. It could be chocolate, sunsets. It could be a number of things. I invite you to focus on any number of these things. Let your mind and your heart dance around whom and what you love. Use your own power of concentration to focus on what you love right now and allow yourself to feel that. Just check in with yourself. When you reflect on what you love, how does your body feel? Do you sit up straighter? When I reflect on what I love, I get more energized, more jubilant, more joyful. I feel a sense of fulfillment. I feel a lightness, a bubbling over. How do you feel when you reflect on whom or what you love? And now I invite you to open your eyes. Just try to stay connected to that feeling. Is love a feeling? I certainly have a lot of feelings when I reflect on what I love. Is love not a feeling, as some people teach, but instead a verb? Some people say, love's not a feeling, it's an action. Love is action. And maybe that's partly true also. Here today, I want to talk about a whole different idea of love. Love as a power, love as a force, love as an energy, and as an energy field, and as an energy center within ourselves. Love can be all of these things, but this is what I'll focus on here today. So I want to focus on three things in my sharing today. First, this idea that love is a force, is an energy field. Second, in my life, I've seen that truth, that faith can move mountains, right? Faith can move mountains, but love dissolves them, Love can melt them. So let's talk about love's power to do that. And then third, I want to talk about love as a magnet. that draws what we love to ourselves and vice versa. So 3 points regarding love. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. In this chapter on the spiritual heart, he talks about this idea of love being a center of energy. And if we think about all life as energy or as consciousness, it's like, life is just about this series of moving through experiences and letting experiences just move through us. And whoa, we see this beautiful tree and we experience and relish this tree, and we see this road, we see this flower, we see these people, and we experience a plethora of emotions and energies as a result of this. But the idea is this, that especially right here in our heart center, which interestingly enough is what Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity movement, also teaches is the center of love, which is the back of the heart. And so Michael Singer talks about chakras, and Charles Fillmore talks about this back of the heart area, which is the center, bodily, of our love faculty, that we experience these things, and normally most experiences pass through us. But what happens occasionally is, he gives the example in his book, well, there's a tree, there's a car, oh no, there's a car that looks like my girlfriend's car, and it looks like she's hugging some guy in that car that looks like my girlfriend. That experience doesn't move through me, he says. This experience sticks because there's a lot of resistance to this idea. There's some negativity, there's some energy around this. In this energy, we don't want to feel these negative feelings. And so what happens is they get lodged in our energetic center. Sometimes they get lodged in a way that it ends up showing up in our bodies as disease, ultimately, if over time we haven't dealt with it. And so the idea behind love is that in us that keeps opening. If love is our very nature, then as A Course in Miracles teaches, as the Sufi poet Rumi teaches, our task is not to seek for love, but to seek and remove all the barriers to it. So that's twofold. One is recognizing, hey, you know what? In my everyday life, I'm not just roaming around experiencing things. I'm like, everything, I'm coming up against things. Things are sticking in me. And I feel a blockage. And I can tell you that, I can tell you now, because hopefully I've grown. But when I was in my early 20s, I actually had a moment where I reflected and I thought to myself, I wondered to myself, is love, the capacity to love, a gene? And did I miss out on it? My relationships were so messed up at that time. My heart was so cold at that time. I was so numb. I was not conscious of my parents' love. I wasn't conscious of feeling love from them, and I wasn't conscious of feeling love toward them. Such that if someone had asked me a basic question, it was a little embarrassing, do you love your parents? Everyone loves their parents. And I actually couldn't connect to that feeling. That's how blocked I was. So when I read this book, it just illuminated so much for me to help me understand that somewhere along the way, my energy got stuck. It became a wall. What happens, though, when you build a wall to keep potential hurt out? You also keep love out. So any positive experience of love that would have affirmed that sense within me was blocked. And so now, knowing that, I become aware that the cleansing process is basically living a life where it's like boom, 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 boom. Everything triggers me because I'm still there. But instead of shutting it down, instead of shutting me down, in this awareness now, I can start to just open all that hurts, And then when I can actually feel that hurt, it doesn't stay. It's only my resistance to it that keeps it locked. Now I have permission to let life move through me. And in that openness, I can live more and more with an open heart. And I'll talk in a moment about how that open heart is actually essential to the unfolding of our indwelling Christ nature. But second, I want to talk about mountains. Because given my history then, if you might imagine, when I read Mark Nepo's Book of Awakening in this particular passage where he draws an analogy between relationships and mountains, I was like, yeah, you get me, right? Relationships and mountains. And I'm going to quote him directly here because he says it so beautifully. He says this: we are each a mountain for the other to climb. And then he goes on to say that often our path to love, to connection, is interrupted by a mishap, a problem, something unexpected that needs attending to. And he says we might call this, in our human judgment, we might call them obstacles. And he says, an example is that in a relationship, in a mountain we are climbing, a tree, like stubbornness, falls in the way. Or perhaps a sadness floods over us. And like rain, it muddies the terrain of this relationship that we're traversing. Or maybe on the journey, we've built some kind of shelter, space, and we think we're safe and protected, and the bugs start to get us, right? So these are some of the examples he uses to describe this journey we have in our approach to one another, in our love, in our movement toward love, in our movement and desire to connect with one another in this energetic space. Michael Singer says, imagine if you used relationships to get to know other people rather than to satisfy what is blocked inside of you. If you're not trying to make people fit into your preconceived notions of what you like and dislike, you will find that relationships are not really that difficult. If you're not so busy judging and resisting people based on what is blocked inside of you, you will find that they are much easier to get along with, and so are you. Letting go of yourself is the simplest way to get closer to others, he says. And so on that journey up the mountaintop, I imagine that like in my relationship with Victor, what happens is a tree falls in the road, and instead of just simply walking over that tree, what I do is I pull up the stump and carry it, and then walk resentfully with him, like I'm carrying this tree. I can't believe he made me carry this tree. That's what we do in relationships. But if instead we just let the experience move through us, and we allow something deeper to unfold, and I'll get to that in a sec. But as I sat with this idea of people, relationships as mountains, and I recalled that scripture, that faith can move mountains. In me, there welled up this passion and this love. And it told me, yes, well, faith can be about the ability to move mountains, but it's love that makes us want to. It's love that draws us to each other, even though we struggle, right? It's love that makes us want to take that extra step toward and reconnect. So what is this love that does that? Mary Ann Williamson said this: when our minds move in harmony with love through forgiveness or prayer or the simplest tender thought, then mountains move and the universe shifts. So the invitation is to move in love toward love. And so this leads to my final point, which is that this force of love, this energy of love, is actually also, as taught by Charles Fillmore, a magnet for our good. And so I want to share here a personal story, something that happened. I rarely share stuff that happens really recently because it's a little bit raw. So let's see if I can do this. So just last weekend, I had a little bit of a personal inner crisis where, like, several of my relationships, important relationships to me, felt like they were completely failing. And I think it was Monday. It was a Monday. And I remember my initial instinct there was to consider how I could use all the spiritual tools that I knew to improve those relationships, to make them better so I could be okay. But all my old stories about, like, oh, you haven't really grown this far. Look, all of these are just testaments to the fact that you're never going to get this right? There was just a lot of negative thinking there. And then this, oh, well, I'm going to work on these positive principles and I'm going to change. I'm going to manifest better relationships. Screw these people. Like, it was just like, Is this recording? Oh, shoot. But then I had an aha moment. The very thing that I teach: seek not to change your outer circumstances. Seek not to use spiritual principles to meet the ego's need to change outer circumstances, but seek instead to wake up. And so that Monday, I did nothing but pray. I went to this place where I am like, God, if you're there, I want to wake up. I want to wake up more than I want anything else. Whatever you're going to put before me, help me wake up. And this is where I feel like the testament to all the other steps that come before it were so relevant. Because here in Unity, we teach that the law of mind action. So like attracts like. So that means that we teach when we are focused on longing, what do we actually attract? More longing. But here, in my desire was imbued with a foundation of faith. So my desire had with it, was accompanied by faith and steadfastness and the ability and willingness to be still and seek out truth and wisdom. And in that place, I had inspiration. I'm going to look at Oprah. And so I pulled up YouTube and I opened up like the first Oprah YouTube that I found. And it happened to be Michael Singer talking about releasing preferences, talking about waking up. And then I had this nudge that said, get his next book. People are talking about the surrender experiment and how they were even more inspired by that than the untethered soul. So I got his book. I finished it in a day. That's love, when you bring the book to the dinner table and I don't know, TMI, just everywhere, the book. And I brought it to bed and I'm listening with my headphones as my husband's already sleeping, but I'm in love with this book. And I felt that the enthusiasm of like romantic love almost. I was so excited to read it, right? There was that feeling, romantic love toward this teaching, this book. But as I read it, something else came up, something I just missed before, even though I've done a talk series on Michael Singer's book. His primary teacher was Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm like, oh, because there's background to this. So when I was in seminary, and I just met Victor, just a few months, and I shared the story last Sunday about how I got this wisdom knowing to go home for the summer and do some work, and I ended up healing with my sister. This was around that very same time. I lamented to my husband, I need a spiritual mentor. I need a spiritual teacher. It's like, and everyone I meet just wants to be my friend. Like I couldn't like seek them for counseling because then they'd come and seek me for counseling. It was a mutual relationship, which is great. But I had this hunger just to be able to like have someone who could just support me, And I said, I'm looking, honey, and I just, well, maybe I'm just not ready or something. But then I got this weird little, those inkling nudges. And I had never heard of Paramahansa Yogananda. And someone introduced me to Autobiography of a Yogi. And so I got that book. And then another person mentioned the book. So I'm like, I have the book, okay? I'm reading it. I'm trying to. And so this was like, so I went to LA for the summer and I started reading this book. And then in the evening when I close my eyes and I'm praying, I'm like, I still need a mentor, And I had a moment where it was a thought in my head. I'm not, hearing voices. It was a thought in my head that said, Paramahansa Yogananda is your mentor. I'm like, okay, well, he's dead, So we'll work this out somehow, And lo and behold, guess what? Self-Realization Fellowship with G Founded is in Los Angeles, where I ended up for the summer. And so I went and visited there. I signed up for his weekly lessons. I was eager. I'm like, I'm ready. And I'm reading the book, but it's not getting to me. So I'm reading it, I'm putting it down. I'm not really affected. That's the end of that. Well, sort of, except for the fact that when I came back after the summer, I was handed several books. One of them, I think I posted a quote on Facebook, and suddenly people were like donating books by Paramahansa Yogananda for me. That's what happened this summer, but still, nothing like arose from that. And so at this point, a week ago, I'm going, wow, okay, so I tried his stuff, well, maybe I'm just not into his writings. Like, maybe I'm supposed to get, like, direct inspiration or something like that, right? And so I'm kind of just opening to this. His surrender experiment is phenomenal, by the way. The next day, this was Monday, the next day I go to church to work. Duke Tufty and I are having a meeting, our weekly meeting, and he says suddenly, we have to cut our meeting short because Sarah, our youth ed person, is leading the meditation today. Let's go sit in it. I'm like, well, okay, okay, let's go. I go in there, and I forgot to tell you. So that night before when I was reading, a woman came to mind. This woman whom I had spoken to about Michael Singer. This woman who does spiritual tutoring with me, who goes to me for tutoring. And I've been thinking about her, but I hadn't seen her for weeks. So what happens? I walk into Myrtle Fillmore Chapel, and there she is, sitting. I haven't seen her for weeks. I sit down next to her, and she turns to me, and she says, Nhien, I have a book for you. And I'm like, oh, really? She says, it's called Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm like, okay. I'll take writings. Maybe I'm supposed to get some direct, inspiration from this man. And I opened this book. And he says to his disciples that when I am gone, when I am only a dream, read my whispers from eternity. Eternally, through it, I will talk to you. So, that happened. So I read that. That was Tuesday, this past week. And then Saturday. I better finish up real quick. Then Saturday. This is amazing, So yesterday, some of you don't know that I've dealt with chronic pain. And yesterday, it felt kind of debilitating. So all I did was try to stay home and meditate. Couldn't get this sermon totally written. And I happened to mention to a small group of people who were texting me about going out, and Billy LeBerge was on that string. And I mentioned that I was going through some pain again. And this morning at around 8 o'clock, Billy happened to text me just to check in to see how I was doing. And I told him, I'm staying home to finish my talk. And he said, oh, okay, well, I'll see you later at U-Nite. And then he says, oh, we're going to Self-Realization Fellowship this morning. And I looked at my calendar, and I have forgotten that earlier this week, I had researched the Self-Realization Fellowship in Kansas City, and I had put it on my calendar. And it was 8 o'clock, and the first meditation was 9 o'clock. So this morning, I showed up at the Self-Realization Fellowship, and I meditated for 45 minutes, and then I did the service. And no big illuminations at this point. And I deliberately mention that because it's important to say that in the path of love, of what we are drawn to, it's not always, the apex mountaintop experiences, right? But I could tell you, when I was driving to Self-Realization Fellowship, it was like I was driving to see a guy on a first date, it was just like, it had that joy and that exuberance and that love to it. I'm like, this is a relationship. This is a mountain that I'm willingly going to traverse. And this commitment to this journey and this awareness of this important relationship is mine to do, even if there are moments of challenge within it. And that, to me, is love. Love draws to us what belongs to us. And the deeper teaching around this is this. Sometimes I talk about the difference between worldly love, between human love, and divine love. But from a unity perspective, there is only one power. There is only one love. It's the love of God. And if there's only one power, then we are, in a way, God. We are part of that oneness, right? But if love is this force that seeks to connect you and me, it's that which draws me home to myself. That what may seem like love for a person is really, in a way, a tool to come home to our oneness. We forget, and then we want that person, right? But if we remember that the desire for that person is at root a desire for God, then it changes everything. Then the tree stumps that we have to walk over and all these things become this passageway to remember oneness. And everything that we resist is actually what we put outside that circle of oneness. And so we remember Michael Singer's teaching to open, so that our circle becomes infinite, that our circle embraces all. And yes, in the individual sense, we will still magnetize to us the relationships, the issues, the addiction to chocolate that helps us to awaken. But if we remember that the goal of them out there is not to meet our needs, but to help me become aware of my love, my yearning to be one, to know my oneness, to wake up into that, then that shifts all my relationships. So, Yogananda said this: in the universal sense, love is the divine power of attraction in creation that harmonizes, unites, binds together. It is opposed by the force of repulsion, which is the outgoing cosmic energy that materializes creation from the cosmic consciousness of God. Repulsion keeps all forms in the manifested state through Maya, the power of delusion that divides, differentiates, and disharmonizes. The attractive force of love counteracts cosmic repulsion to harmonize all creation and ultimately draw it back to God. Those who live in tune with the attractive force of love achieve harmony with nature and their fellow beings and are attracted to blissful reunion with God. And with that, I'm going to invite you now into a time of meditation. I'll have John start us out, but please take the time of music to close your eyes, go within to yourself, to activate your faith, your strength, your inner wisdom, and your love.